This is an account on the NRX movement in the United States and how it's affecting the world. And it's an anti-democratic movement that wants to get rid of the political world and economical world as we know it today, and reinstall a kind of monarch and global corporate domination, because that's the natural way of things as they see it. And this is a recollection of the fine article by Morten Skovgaard in the magazine POV, a Danish magazine that gives very beautiful and good insights in different issues around the world. And I was very intrigued by this because it's very actual, and it's a part of what's going on in the world to understand it even more in depth. So the basic idea of this is to get rid of the democracies as we know them today and the bureaucracies, and let people live in a kind of micronations or macro hierarchies where the corporates are dominating, and where people like will move with the capital or move with the corporates, and they will be led by them, and they will also be governed by a kind of a tech monarch in a way. So it's not going to be the voters, and not going to be these actual democratic and sick states as they see it in this neoliberal thinking. And Morten Skovgaard has been very fine in his way of trying to go back in history and look at the main figures and the ideology behind it, and that's what I'm gonna put into this summary right now. So basically, the NRX is an anti-reactionary movement that's sick and tired of democracy and had its voices on the internet, basically, as a niche and as a sub-movement and as a like underground thinking. But it came more and more to light, and several ideological figures were brought back from history. Three of those were from the past century, as Morten Skovgaard he mentions in POV. So one of these ideological like forefathers is Hans Hermann Hoppe in his book about democracy, The God That Failed, and another an important figure from that time who says that democracy as a kind of governing entity has failed its people or worshippers in many ways, and he think it should be like exchanged by monarchies and private-led governments, because they are superior and stronger and they lead the productivity in people, and that's what takes us out of this sick and very sickening way of life and society as we see it today. That's the idea in Hermann Hoppe's book from 2001. The problem, as Hans Hermann Hoppe see it with democratic governments, is they think about their own popularity and always the small interest, so they don't look long-term and long-sighted, but they keep their eyes on the horizon where they can get re-elected, and that's not always in the interest of in the long run for a government or for a nation or the people even. And the people will be like communistic in their abuse of the democratic society, because they will vote for those who will let them have the best and the most goods out of here and now productive entities. Like if you have some very rich people and companies, most of the people who doesn't have it, they would like to milk the cow, and that's why they would like to have governments that's always looking into these corporates and how they work, and regulate them by bureaucracy and thereby control them. And that's sickening, and that's not good for productivity. That's the main entity and the most basic way of regenerating wealth. That's what should be the driving force, and the driving force should be the one that's leading the nations. And that's why Hermann Hoppe he sees the monarchy as a better way of life, because the monarch owning the land or the country or maybe the big tech monarch, as I call him, he would become a tech monarch, because it would be the technology firms that he's going to lead, and he would look at the long-sighted interest of his own and thereby those who are living under his entity. And that's why it won't be the personal interest, but also the governing interest of the land or the country that will be leading. That's the argument, at least in said in other words, in Hermann Hoppe's ideas. Another post-modern time thinker was Julius Evola, an Italian philosopher and esoteric that is mentioned in this article in POV by Morten Skovgaard. And he lived from 1898 to 1974, has been a big source of influence for many neo-NRX people, like some of those we were going to mention later, as Peter Thiel and some other figures like Curtin Jarvis and Nick Hall, and it's gonna be connected a bit later. But this guy Julius Evola has had this idea that that life is lacking the transcendental truth, and the modern society has lost the contact with these ideas, and people are being like misled by the ideas of democracy and egalitarianism, because it's a cultural decay, and it will lead to the fall of civilizations, because then everything will just be mixed up in ways that's not prosperous for anyone. And he has a book called Revolt Against the Modern World from 1934, talking about the strong traditional civilizations and how they had a godly order. And if you look at the modern society, it's led by materialism, egoism, and weakness, and people are only led by short-term ideas of gains, and it's only like there is no hierarchy, there's no order, and that will lead to decay among people. And that will also pacify the ideas of religion. It will make it much more neutral and not so important. And it will also take away the principles of honor, discipline, and transcendence from people's life. Three very core issues that have been upholding societies for centuries has been lost in the democratic society that doesn't uphold these values. And that's why it's a kind of going back to a traditionalistic and anti-modern ideal that can uphold society on the rule of maybe the one strong man and the one strong state and the one dominating people. And that doesn't mean there can't be minorities or other people, but they just have to fit in or live under these ideals, as also the NRX movement would argue. I just have to specify that this guy, Julian Evola, isn't religious. He's not arguing for a religious society. He's arguing for a strong and elitarian society. That's all in his political view, and that's not to misunderstand it with the idea of a theocratic society. And then comes in the modern time two persons, as mentioned by Morten Skovgaard in POV's very fine article recently published, and that arose my what can you say, my lust to give it over as a short article, put it online. And one is called Curtis Jarvin, and the other is Nick Land, and these two has taken up these ideas, and they see democracy as an undermining ideology and way of life to the natural hierarchies that people accepts and lives by, and it's just a way of like cheating people out of reality and seeing the reality as it is, and that's led by hierarchies. And they also argue, as Peter Thiel will do later, another guy that's also part of this movement somehow, according to the article here, is that that people will be like governed by bureaucrats and politicians and people who will like just try to stay in power. They don't have any personal interest or gain from the productivity of the the economy or the institutions, or what do you call it, from what they are governing. Their own main interest is how they can govern so they can stay in power, and that's their only goal, while the corporates and the monarch and people like living in a productive society with liberal, very neoliberal and very strong liberal views will be governed by people who have interest in keeping the nation running for a long time and keeping the productivity going up. It's like the idea of somebody owning a company and has workers and employees in it, and they can be actionaries, as Peter Thiel later would argue. That's not the problem. The problem is that they are living in a society where they are actually out of the governing, and the people who owns the companies are always regulated by bureaucracies that's controlling them and having to always constrain them, and like people voting for people who would like them to milk that cow in a way. That's my own phrases, but it's just to make it available for anyone who's listening. A third and important thinker for the NRX movement, maybe not directly but indirectly through other channels, is a guy from Germany called Carl Schmitt, from 1888 to 1985. And he has this idea that politics should basically be about friend and enemy, and not the idea of always making compromises and rational and unrational discussions at the same time. It's a base of conflict, and how to negotiate and dominate that conflict, and how to get on being a winner as far as possible. And in this he argues that the leader has the ability to make the decisions. It's not always the bureaucratic laws and details that should restrain such a leader. It's what's in the interest of this prosperity and the interest of his nation or entity that should lead the way, and not all these governing bureaucratic ideas and all the restraints in the law. And this Carl Schmitt, he argues that democracy in its parliamental ways are just not true. It's a big cheat. It's a big way of letting the elites behind the line decide, but letting it look like it has been voted through. And that was an argument he made, so that it should be like, why not give it up to a leader and the elite anyhow, because they are leading this. But why complicate things with bureaucracies and a number of people who doesn't have interest in efficiency and make things going and prosperous? So a political leader would be like a godly figure who would make the final decisions that will be followed, and that these new secularized religious ideas and the state that governs is not in itself efficient or good enough. And he had these controversial ideas, of course, and it resounds very much as a kind of support to Nazism. That's very clear from what I'm reading, and it's also it's like glorifying the one big and strong leader. But beneath these ideas are some other ideas have been taken into the NRX movement, that the modern way of life under democracy and parliamentism is a big cheat. It's a big false way of decision, where people think they are deciding, but truly it's still the elite behind the lines. And that brings us to the NRX movement in its modern form. And here is James Burnham, an important figure, as mentioned by Morten Skovgaard in POV's very fine article that I'm relating in this summary here. Burnham, who died in 1987, was a writer and a political theoretiker that wrote about these arguments in his book, The Managerial Revolution, and that's from 1941. And that's that capitalism wasn't going to be a socialist society, but a leader society where private entities um, are led by its leaders and not by bureaucracy and technocrats and people elected in a way they don't have anything to do with these corporates. And that's why the idea of true capitalism and liberalism was lost, because the way democracy is governing things is like it's controlling and governing these entities, not directly but by making all kind of regulations, and that will make things inefficient and go bad and go in the wrong way and make it all weak. And it's weak by the interference of the state government and the regulations of the economy and the market. And he's opposed to that, that guy James Burnham, and he says that there should be an elite, and that elite was the one who had the right to govern, because it's governing. It's a minority, yes, but it's governing by its power that's invested in it by not by the people, by what's been running societies for centuries. It's the productivity and the ones like who owns things in a way or another. And when he looks at the modern liberal democracies, he say that this is just a facade anyhow, because the power is still concentrated in the hands of a governing elite, and the ideologies doesn't change that. The political ideologies just keep the control elements in the hands of this elite, even though on the facade it looks like it's governed by democratic tools and voting and people's participation, but behind the lines it's manipulating the masses and keeping the power into the hand of the elite. But it's just the wrong elite, and that not the one that's gonna bring prosperity. And that's the basic idea in the movement of NRX, is that we are anyhow not really living the democratic society. So we are giving the power to an elite or a small group, but who is it? Who is governing us, and to what purpose? And is it efficient enough? So that's the basic idea they are really promoting through the last maybe 2-3 decades, according to the article of Morten Skovgaard in POV. And James Burnham, he wrote another book, The Suicide of the West, from 1964, arguing that the Western civilization had too much focus on guilt, weakness, and self-destructive ways, because it's not upholding its values. It's committing a cultural suicide through multiculturalism and the activism on the left wing and the anti-patriotic ways that makes it only and mostly focused on consideration and considerations for others and relativism in morals. And that's not gonna work, because that's what made societies fall in history before. And that's why he wants a strong elite that can lead and show powerful interventions and deal with internal and external threats, because it has the power to do so. So Suicide of the West was later like a kind of anti-liberal and progressive piece of thought, and it later got into these circles of the NRX movements, who also adapted these ideas. So we have these 4 ideological persons who had like put and shown the way to this NRX movement that's today trying to like make way for these thoughts directly or behind the lines, as I understand from the article of Morten Skovgaard in the Danish magazine POV. And so to sum up, the NRX thinkers of movement has taken many of these ideas and other work, and maybe put it into a new framework, that they should reset the society from this widespread sickening and sickened democracy and bureaucracy behind it, and the small elites behind the lines governing for their own benefits and not for the benefits of the productivity and economy and the progressive of the whole nation, and to shift all that. And as I mentioned from Skovgaard's article in POV, there are Curtis Yarvin and Nick Land, very neo-reactionary. They called neo-reactionary front figures, and then you have Peter Thiel as one of the main figures as well. He's co-stifter of several big companies, and he taps into these ideas, even though he expresses that he's not on total line with these two just mentioned front figures. But he can see that the democratic society is going to a crash down, and he got inspiration from the sovereign individual and how to survive and thrive during the collapse of the welfare state, from a guy called William Rees-Mogg and James Dale Davison, that gave out this book in 1997. And that book was like about how people should master the transition in the age of information, and that the conflict is like a conflict between these governing entities and the freedom and liberal ways of the macro entities. Like people should be free, not to be governed by these entities that's taking their vote, but actually controlling their lives in much more ways than they think. And so they see there should be a new way. So the whole movement is actually a kind of innovative movement to try to save society in their own view, and to save the Western civilization from decay and to fall. And that's why they need a strong leader, and they need to build on the powerful people in the Western society who can lead because they own and because they have interest in prosperity. And their prosperity will bring prosperity to everyone under them, and there could be places for actionaries and people who can be part of it. But the founders should rule. That's the basic rule that both Peter Thiel and those other mentioned people hold in their heads, and people who owe things should have access to governing it and making the rules around it, and making the decisions directly or through a chosen kind of monarch. I call it a tech monarch because it's going to be in a new technological form. So they see the new way of the Western world as an ambitious project of shifting society and getting rid of this sick bureaucracy and democracy as we see it today, because it's a facade and it's a farce, and it's in many ways been visible to people now. Maybe it worked for 100, 200 years as an act, but now it's not working, and that's my rephrasing of it, of the ideas they are actually trying to get up to lift society on. And so it should be the monopoles that lead society, the cultural monopole, the technological monopole, and the governing monopole of the companies, and there should be no big competition among these companies. And he mentions this guy in his book 0 to 1 as a Peter Thiel from 2014, that competition is for losers, the free market is overstated, and that innovation is the first monopolistic control over the markets. That's the way to get on with society. He mentions Google, Amazon, Tesla as big companies who can invest in the future on long term, because they don't have to compete on the short term and thereby lose all their energy and focus. So he needs this society that's big and strong and based on these big corporates, and the people who owns has the right to rule. So it's not in the hand of the people, or in the democratic institutions. And as mentioned before, they see it anyway as a facade, as something that's not true or real. People are not being governing themselves, and they are not really free. They are governed by elites and political ideologies who are making their own interest more important than the broad people's interest. And at the same time, they're weakening society from within by all kind of ideas that opposes the the monoculture that should be leading and having the rule. And that's not to exclude people, and that's also my extra addition here. It's not to exclude people from society. They need they need to openness to anyone who can like tap in this productivity, but they need to align with one culture and one strong leader, and companies who owns things can lead things, and that will bring efficiency, strength, and an understanding that's very different than the one we see today. And that's why that Morten Skovgaard's picture holds that one about having a computer and resetting the computer to before pre-enlightenment.exe. It means like getting the society back to the time before we got all these movements of democracy and people's votes and human rights and everyone free to pursue his own goals. It's like it has led us to catastrophe according to NRX, and they wanna infect that now where they have the chance to do it. And so to sum up the whole idea of RX1, it's a shift towards a high technological and nationalistic post-liberal future, a future that holds a whole new way of living life and being part of nations. There shouldn't be borders and nations and regulations. People should move wherever they are needed. It's like the productivity that counts, and it's their participation. So this is not an anti-religious movement or an anti-ethnic movement. It will, I'm sure, use people from all kind of ethnicity and religious backgrounds, as they already do now. It's the productivity and the goals that counts, the goals for the company's interest, and not what people hold dear in their small villages voting for or against. Just because people can be from another ethnic minority or another place of the earth, they don't care about all that. They need a strong rule in a way that's transnational and can transform the relations. So anyone who has big tech and has interest, that's where they are, and that's where their nation should be, and not other kind of politics that's pseudo real and not realistically bringing back the goods. That's to say it in an open and rephrasal way. So it's like Morten Skovgaard say it in POV. It's like the perfect storm of neo-reactionary ideologists who has had this idea for decades, and a group of interested milliardaires and rich people, and a group of reactionary Generation X people, like tired of the way things are, who met together in what they call a perfect storm. All in order to make the exit for democracy and the entrance for a tech capitalistic, tech feudal society that's led with some kind of older measures and older arguments, but in new forms. But within this NRX movement, there are of course also hardliners and softliners, or people who are more focused on the political system, and others who are focused on the economical system. And so you can already see they are not on total alignment. And we have this guy called Friedman, as mentioned by Skovgaard in the article to POV, who is the grandchild of Milton and Rose Friedman, the milliardaires from from the century before, and others as well, like Peter Thiel and some of their fellows. They are more focused on the society that the governing is more free, and that people could choose different society models, and the concept is more to be fascinated by a free and open society that gives way to better productivity and better conditions for the companies and their leaders, and not so much if the government is this way or another, or in a certain form, as some of the ones mentioned before, who really see the monarch and see the what can you say, the corporate owners as the feudal leaders, and the people just working for them, and they have all the power and all the rule, and there is no equality, because that's just not real anyway. It's just a way to make people think that they are equal and they are free, but basically they are still the slaves. And some of these names have brought up arguments from other names in the future, in the past, saying that, for instance, that people during slavery had better times than when after they got freed from slavery, and women had better times before they got out and being free on the market as they are. So there are some arguments digging back into history and another way of life, and another form of governing and looking at society and people and what's natural, the natural orders as we can see them from the 15th and 16th centuries philosophers. And so this is a big break the NRX movement is doing with the established way of life and what we call the democracy, or the God that failed people. And so we get to the last part of this very interesting article of Peter Thiel about the political manifest that this NRX movement really is like expressing. And so basically, they have, as I've mentioned now a few times, they have these four basic ideological elements. First of all, that the democratic societies as they are today are incitments for bad decisions, and they are governing towards stagnation and decay. And that these people sitting in this so-called democratic cathedral, as the guy Jarvis tells it, and Skovgaard rephrased it in his article in POV. He says that this cathedral these people are sitting in is have the look alike as free and open, but it's actually suppressing and not so rational, even though it looks so. And that we need to be governed by what can you say, well-going companies, and with CAOs, or an elite, a monarch, autocrat, whatever it is. I call it a tech monarch that will be in the lead, having total control and can show authority and efficiency, and that's what's needed most. And that's like to just sum it up. And in the end, they say, as Skovgaard he phrases them saying, "Take the red pill." That means wake up, in an association to the what you call it, the Matrix movies, where Neo gets the blue pill and the red pill, and he has to choose one of them. The blue pill is to stay in his happy unknowing, and the red pill is to wake up and see reality where it's going, and just oppose it and get the power back. And so it's kind of the sum up of the NRX movement that's today, as they see it in POV, and the Skovgaard see it in POV in his article, has gotten all the way to the White House, and is starting to start this new operative system for the world, and change the roles and the way people are living and doing. And that's basically what it's all about. And this is up and open for debate, and also open for maybe an eye-opener for a new way of life or an old way of life. And to me, it seems like plausible. And I've mentioned it somewhere before in my books without being so clear about these things, because I didn't have a clue where it was headed. But I could see democracies failing, and I could see the systems that we had in the Middle Ages, and from my old Islamic perspective, that the world is not such an ideal place as it should be, and therefore it will shift, because that's history. It will shift sooner or later in one way or another, and once people lose their faith in that in that way of life, it will slowly be undermined, or other ideas will get hold of people. And that's maybe what's happening now, that people who can see it from the inside, or have been part of it, or have seen how it's overtaken by forces that's not productive, and not giving way to better equality and the true freedom that they're promising. Everything like that will sooner or later fall, as Abraham Lincoln has said, for eternally, and it has been said in all philosophies and religious ways. But he said it most clearly by saying that you can cheat the people part of the time, and you can cheat some of the people all the time, but you can't cheat all the people all the time. So the basis of how life naturally is a philosophy that's important to understand. That's my opinion on this. It's important to go with how things are, and not try to put them into forms that doesn't fit, because that will falter and that will fall. And maybe that's what they are saying, these people. That's what's happening, and I think they will resonate with a lot of people from political movements around the world who has the same ideas, but in their own cultural context. Like in the Islamic world, where people would say, listen, that's what we've been saying for 100 years or more, and the Jewish communities will be saying the same, and the Christian communities will be saying the same. And so you have now, as they say, this storm brewing in the United States, changing the system from within, or trying to, and putting the ideas forward to that will also give strength to the movements other places around the world, or maybe places where they already have it like that. They have a monarch, they have an elite, they have efficiency for those who own the things, and people has to follow, and they will get their security, and they will get their freedom within the limits of the morals of that society that's basically and mostly led by religious values and views, and people accept it as long as it gives them prosperity and brings their nations up to speed with other nations. And that's what's needed, instead of this false freedom where people aren't free and they can't follow the democratic process anyway, and they cannot interfere in what's going on behind the lines between the elites that's just governing by themselves for themselves, and taking care of their own interests. So let the people who has the ability and God has chosen to lead. That's the argument that these people will be saying on the other side, and let's lead with the defined morals, and let's lead with our religious values. Even though there are minorities who doesn't accept them, they will have to adhere to them or move somewhere else if they don't like them. And that's, they put in that way, they put society into like a frame of meaning that makes sense, and this is simplified for the brains of the ordinary people who cannot live and take paradox in for a long time. They will just say, okay, what's going on? Am I losing my country, my nation, my ethnicity, my strength? And what's happening? And how can I stop that? And that's what these people will ensure. They will ensure prosperity, but you will have to give up all this voting system. Maybe you can become an actionnaire. Maybe you will become part of that value system and just transform your life and accept that you are part of a fight. There are friends and there are enemies, and there are negotiations in betweens. So this is just to sum up, in my opinion, what's going on. And I'm going to talk more about this because it's very interesting. And I see it as maybe a way out of the situation we are in, because this clash between this idea and maybe left-winged ideas and so-called democratic ideals that's not really upholding in real life is maybe needed to freshen up where we are and the views on the world, to get out of these destructive and identity decaying situations that the people are in. I think most people would rather have a fight with a foe than to live always fighting their own identity and who they are, and why there isn't place enough for them in society, and no productivity, and being governed by a system they cannot influence anyway. They can go and vote, but you cannot influence it. As I call them, all the clowns in the circus, the politicians, they are standing there and having a good smile in front of the cameras, and getting help from people who wants to entice and help them get voted, because they will get something out of it behind the lines. Maybe these people are just saying, well, that's what's going on. Why keep hiding it? Let's let this elite rule you as they are already, and stop taking the blue pill, thinking that you are voting and you are happy and you're free. You are not a bit more free than you would be in a feudal system. You are going to work from morning to evening. You're getting stressed. You're getting fired. All these rules about protecting your human rights and protecting who you are, that's not upholding. I have seen it, and people have seen it, and this is a personal account now. It's easy to fire people if you don't want them. There is no this kind of security as we think, and giving people something to live on of social income, and so that's fine and beautiful, but it's not enough, and it's just to keep people from revolting or destroying and going into total anarchy. So that's a small price to pay to keep the elite running behind the lines. And now you see, I'm brewing my own ideas out of what I'm reading of in the NRX movement, and I see something exciting in it, but also something scary at the same time. I would like to talk on that in a separate talk altogether.